Reed, coming to you from Cloud and Leaf Bookstore, of which I am the proud owner. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and I want to thank the Driftwood Public Library in Lincoln City for inviting me to be part of their Oregon Legacy series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the author of 5 works of literary fiction, most recently Pale Morning Light with Violet Swan, which is this book here. It was published last October, and like my novel before it, The Days When Birds Come Back, both of them take place in Manzanita, where I live, although I changed the name in the novels to Nestucca Beach for the purposes of the story. Up until I purchased the bookstore nearly 2 years ago, I was the co-director of a creative writing program every summer at the Albert Ludwig University in Freiburg, Germany, where I also taught novel writing. I'm not a native Oregonian, but I've lived in Oregon for most of my adult life, and it's where I feel most at home. So let me begin by talking about this coast and the influence it has had on just about everything. It's not an exaggeration to say that there is always something to watch and feel and become a part of in this landscape. Storms roll in and out like climate theater, often leaving power outages in their wake and residents reading by candlelight. By contrast, summer days can be still, delicate, gorgeous, perfect, followed by equally perfect night skies that are completely shot through with stars. If you live here, you know what it is to be part of the ever-changing moods of the landscape. A friend of mine once said about the Oregon coast, "The skies don't keep their promises." Yes, one can't assume that the appearance of a warm and dry day will follow another, nor can one assume its opposite. But what we do know for certain is that the acts that make up this story of our lives on this coast include campfires and vermilion sunsets and bald eagles and an elk herd that strolls down Main Street like a boss. Whales are often seen spouting just offshore, visible to the naked eye. Whales swimming at a distance that can be measured as 1,000 yards from where I sleep. It's impossible to live in such a place and not be struck by its wonder. When it comes to fiction and the type of writing that moves me most, and the type I strive to write, setting isn't limited to a stage or a backdrop as a place for characters to tell their stories. Instead, it is used to inform character itself, the nuance of emotion and circumstance, as well as plot and mood. Landscape alone is or can be the very basis for what makes up who a character is. To be on the Oregon coast is to be in the presence of staggering beauty, a world of wonder, from tide pools to mountain forests breaking into giant cliffs at the ocean's edge. The vast, spectacular landscape never gets old. It is so much bigger than we are, and in this way inspires self-reflection and contemplation, if you take the time to allow for that, to observe and be patient. Quite simply, it is a place that is made for writers, and of course for readers too. When I begin writing a new novel, I know from the start where the characters make their home or might have made it in the past. This gives me a sharper view of the world through their eyes. To my mind, character grows organically out of place. For example, a broken heart is a fairly universal state of being. It doesn't matter where you live in the world, an aching heart will feel like an aching heart. But a rancher, say, in eastern Oregon, who has lost the love of his life, will inevitably move through the world reacting to his pain from the place beneath his feet, as opposed to, say, the ways in which a woman in a high-rise in New York City with a broken heart might react to hers. The rancher may contemplate a mountain walk with his dogs to try and rid himself of memories, only to get caught unaware in a storm and end up at the mercy of the elements he wishes he were watching through his kitchen window. The landscape itself has trapped him, both metaphorically, for it too contains memories, and literally. He can't escape his emotional state any more than he can escape the storm. By contrast, the woman in New York City who, say, recently lost her beloved mother may decide to attend a work party just to get out of the house. But once there, overhears a conversation between two women complaining about the way their own mothers interfere with their lives. And because it seems there's no justice in this world, our woman will leave the party feeling worse than she did when she went in. Adding to her heartache will be the city lights themselves, the very lights she found beautiful and hopeful on her way into the party. Now they do nothing more than illuminate everything hard and rotten that might be found on a city street, and this mirrors her emotional state of despair. It's always been my intention to create as much of a visceral experience for the reader as I possibly can in my novels, using the tools of craft that allow a reader to feel the texture of a story. And in this way, the landscape of the coast lends itself well to my work. In fact, my most recent main character, Violet Swan, is a world-famous painter of abstract geometric art that is known for its effect on viewers. Through the use of shape, color, and space, she evokes feelings of joy, harmony, and happiness. One could say the same thing about the Oregon coast. So I set out to offer readers a slice of the experience of what it is to be here, to live inside the story a bit more fully. By breathing life into the landscape so that the setting itself is interwoven with the emotional lives of the characters, readers can feel what it is to stand atop a cliff looking out over the ocean, or stroll along the shore, listening to that unique sound of waves tumbling lava rocks like glass balls clanging in a barrel. Or through an old-growth forest surrounded by moss and fern and the acrid scent of pine. All of this while contemplating the joys and struggles of what it means to be human. If I can transport readers to the very ground on which a story takes place, I feel as if I've done my job a little bit better. Of course, one of the biggest reasons for grounding a reader in this way is that it adds to the emotional impact of a character's life, and in turn, the reader's. It's not enough to describe a view. Fiction isn't meant to be a travel log. By shining a light on ourselves, fiction, when tied to a landscape, reflects a wider range of an emotional state and struggle of character. One woven into the other evokes an ancient interconnectedness between people and place. Kevin Barry, an Irish author who lives on the coast of Ireland in a place reminiscent of our own coast, says this about the sense of place in his work. Quote, "The central philosophy underpinning all of my work to date was that places exerted their own feelings." Unquote. I couldn't agree more. The Oregon coast is full of moods, and these moods are what myths are made of. I believe that if the coast could talk, she would say, "I am as gorgeous as anything you will ever witness on planet Earth. My beauty will bring you to your knees. I'm also treacherous, dangerous, sending sneaker waves that will pull you into the ocean's grasp when you least expect. My flowers will bloom throughout the year, and I'll offer berries and stunning glimpses of wildlife simply for your pleasure. But I might also take your home in a landslide, or, surprise, a tornado, and everything you know to be your life will be lost to oblivion." Both of the main characters for my last two novels are tied intrinsically to the natural world. One woman is a writer, the other a painter, and the ridge on which they live, which is essentially the site of Neahkahnie Mountain, plays a role in their healing, their growth, their pain, loneliness, fears, as well as their hopes and inspiration. The solitude that they find there is much like the solitude that I have found, and is coupled with the presence of beauty juxtaposed with a sense of danger and uncertainty, each stirring and steering the imagination toward places it might not otherwise go. So So I'd like to share a couple of short passages with you from Pale Morning Light with Violet Swan to help illustrate what I mean by the use of setting, from a room in a house on a ridge to a yard just beyond the windows to the expanse of the forests and ocean. Setting can be used to illuminate a character's state of mind and life struggles. So here we have Violet, a 93-year-old painter who is at the end of her life. Her husband Richard, who died 20 years before the story began. Quincy, the young woman who owns the bookstore. Yes, there is a bookstore, very much like this one. Francisco, Violet's only son, a man in his 60s. And Daniel, Violet's only grandchild, now in his 30s, and someone she loves most in the world. Her concentration was slipping. The base coat on her canvas was only half finished, and still she remained at the windows, distracted by the light, the yard, and the thick forest beyond the grass, the warm sun drawing heat from the trees, and orange gas rising. Periwinkle crocuses streamed over the lawn like light bulbs with golden filaments. Barn swallows flitted to and from phone wires, their steely blue wings and mustard bellies flashing in the sun. The Oregon coast had finally thrown off its gray sky cape and stepped into the fuller light of spring. Violet coughed into a tissue from her pocket, catching rust-colored flecks against the white. She wiped her mouth, balled the tissue, tossed it into the wastebasket, and looked west through the opposite set of windows at the curved horizon, where the sky met the ocean, blue against blue. The cool colors had a way of tempering the heat inside Violet's lungs. The little town of Nestucca Beach was beginning a new day, throwing open wooden shutters like some centuries-old village. The scent of dark coffee carried on the breeze. In the center of town, sourdough bread and cinnamon rolls from the bakery filled the air. Over the next few hours, the shop owners would unlock their doors and wave to each other across the only street of commerce, like another place from another time. But that was how things were here and now on the coast of Oregon. For decades, Violet and Richard had gotten out early for a morning stroll. Back in the 1940s, when the town was just a fraction of what it was now, visitors rented oversized canvas tents above the high tide line, equipped with rugs and real beds and a pot-belly stove, all tended by young women who worked for the Neocani Tavern, which had a limited number of rooms and was too expensive for some. Visitors rose from their tents into the morning light, stretched and waved hello to Richard and Violet, and looked around as if they couldn't believe their luck. And Violet and Richard would glance at each other with the same happy stupor. Sometimes it was true what people said about remembering something as if it was yesterday. Soon, Quincy would be hobbling around the bookstore, turning on the stained glass lamps. She'd flip over the sign to "Come in," so that a day like so many others could begin. Except today, Daniel was coming home, and in spite of her terrible night's sleep, the air felt charged with excitement. Some of the best hours of Violet's life were early Saturday mornings when she'd gather up young Daniel in a jacket and boots, and they'd lumber down the hill for hot chocolate and a cinnamon roll. They'd pick out a dune to sit and eat with sticky, sandy fingers and watch the waves and talk about how the shoreline and water and sky were never, ever the same shape or color from one day to the next. They'd find chunks of agate and shells and sand dollars, as one would expect, but also strange things like the tail of a disembodied beaver, soda cans with Japanese writing, and mermaids' purses that had housed the eggs of sharks. More than once, they were lucky enough to witness a baby seal brought on shore to rest by its mother while she hunted for food. This spotted blob of tender sleep, rocking gently at the end of each wave, like a child rocked by its mother. Violet and Daniel often played a one-sided game of hide-and-seek, where Daniel hid and Violet had to find him. The thrill each felt toward tucked-away faces brought them even closer. The energy rising off of Daniel's concealed little body was like a beacon guiding Violet to the place where he'd disappeared. And when she discovered him crouched behind a dune or a giant log or charred remnants of a bonfire, he burst forth with a squeal, arms stretched into the air, giggling. Violet sensed that the exhilaration had something to do with anticipation, but also with knowing he would always be found. It was Daniel who had rounded out her understanding of the ways in which love and beauty and happiness all lived inside the body, thriving within the hidden spaces of the mind and heart. If only she had known with Francisco what she had come to know with Daniel, motherhood might have been easier, her expression of love for her son more casual with joy. I'd like to go back for a moment to what I was saying earlier about taking the time to observe the world around us. I want to add one more thing to that, and that this is the importance of attention, or perhaps what we give our attention to and why. As I mentioned, I'm not a native Oregonian, and perhaps this plays some role in the way I am so captivated by this place. Observing my surroundings began at an early age, and it has served me well in my lifetime. My parents were both from the South, and while I was raised for the most part in the Midwest, their loyalties remained anchored to the lives they'd known before. From recipes to music to magnolias and live oaks and swimming in ice-cold springs on blistering hot days, they never seemed to stop missing the place from which they had come. And I had a sense that being removed from the place that first shaped a person was to be removed in some ways from one's identity. My own life and circumstances became complicated by these factors. We moved so often that I never quite had such a place. I attended 11 different elementary schools by the 5th grade. I honestly don't know how I learned a single thing. But I will say that libraries, both public and school libraries, were a lifesaver. Books filled with stories were one of the few constants in my life. They were an anchor, a place that landed me, filled with characters who made sense of the world. Books made for good company and sustained me in ways that I believe helped shape the person I would eventually become. One of the reasons the writing program that I used to direct abroad was successful, or that any program of this kind is successful, is that writers come from all over the world to a place they've never been, where most don't speak the language and everything they see and hear is brand new. As many of you know who travel to places unknown, especially to places where a different language is spoken, one's senses are suddenly turned way up high. Every sight and sound and taste and smell stands out. For example, most of us can't remember what we had for dinner 2 nights ago, and yet we can describe in detail a meal we ate in a foreign country 5 years ago, as well as everything the waiter said, the color of the tablecloth, and the beak of the sparrow that stole a breadcrumb. When you're forced to pay attention, whether it's because the world around you is brand new and requires new skills to navigate, or because it is drawing attention to itself through its own beauty or threat, details full of texture and meaning will emerge when you're paying attention. And as a result, life and literature will be more fully experienced. There's no greater compliment for me as a writer than when a reader says that they felt as if they just spent hours on the coast of Oregon with my characters. To offer the experience to others of what it feels like to be here, and do so through words on a page, is profoundly satisfying, not to mention a little bit mystifying. If it's not already abundantly clear, I will say for the record that I am so grateful to be able to live and work where I do, in Manzanita on the coast of Oregon. I am lucky and I know it. Thank you all for listening today. And here's to the wonder that is our home.